here with Dr. Christine Schintgen. She is president of Our Lady's Seat of Wisdom College up in Barry's Bay, Ontario, 4 hours north of Toronto. President of the school. Your specialty, though, is poetry, right? And
yeah,
literature?
That's right. Well, literature in general, but poetry in particular,
Mm-hmm.
because I love poetry. I write poetry. I'm a published poet, and I love to study poetry and to share my love for poetry with students and anyone who's interested to talk about it.
Tell us a little bit about your study, like your story. Where did you study?
Sure. Well, I grew up in Ottawa, Ontario, and I went to Carleton University in Ottawa for my undergraduate studies. I did a Bachelor of Arts in English Literature, and that was good. I learned a lot. I read great works of literature from Beowulf to up until contemporary literature. And then I went off to Oxford University in England to do postgraduate studies. So I did an MPhil in Victorian literature, and then I did what they call a DPhil, which is basically a doctorate also in Victorian literature.
Okay. Is there a Carleton in the United States?
You're right. I think it's in Minnesota.
Okay.
So not to be confused. It was not. It was not that one that I went to. It was Carleton in Ottawa, in Ontario. Mm-hmm.
And what was Oxford like? Is that
Oxford was great. It was a wonderful experience. I think the thing about Oxford is you value the whole experience, not just what you learn in the classroom, although that was great too, but meeting people from all over the world, having access to incredible libraries. The Bodleian Library in Oxford has just about any book you could want or imagine. And then there are the bookstores, Blackwell's bookstore, and college libraries on top of the Bodleian Library. I mean, it's just a book lover's paradise. So I really enjoyed my time at Oxford. The thing about Oxford too is you have a lot of freedom to explore intellectual ideas. It's a bit less structured curriculum, so once you have your topic and a good supervisor, you can really explore and go deeply into a subject, which I really did enjoy. I enjoyed that freedom. And
you had good mentors and teachers that were
Yes, especially for my doctorate. I had a great supervisor for my thesis, and Dr. Julian Thompson at Regents Park College. He was a good guide and mentor for my thesis writing experience, which was good. I was writing about a Victorian prison inspector by the name of Arthur Griffiths, Major Arthur Griffiths. He was one of the first national prison inspectors in England. That title, that job came into existence in the 1870s, and he was one of the first to take up that job. So he would go around by train around various parts of England, inspecting the prisons and seeing that they came up to a common standard, which was a new thing. And in his spare time, often while he was traveling on trains, he would write novels about criminals and about prisons and detectives, and I was just fascinated with all of that. So I wrote a biography of him and a study of his treatment of prisons and criminals and detectives and so forth. So it was a great experience, and of course good training just in terms of managing a big writing project. Hundreds of pages long. It's quite an experience to have to manage a writing project of that size. So you learn a lot of skills in terms of planning, outlining, having to break things down. That's something I teach when I teach writing. Just break it down into manageable chunks. Know where you're going, know what you're trying to argue, but you can't write it all at once. You have to sort of think of it in terms of different parts that support an overall work. So that's what I did with my thesis, and that's what my students do with their 500-word essays.
Wow. Now, what time period did he live in?
He lived from 1838 to 1908.
Okay. I imagine prisons were horrific back then, weren't they?
Well, there was that. There was that. He was trying to work to make it less so, to have some common standards and ensure that the food quality was good, but not too good, but good enough.
I remember seeing on one of these shows, like I think it was a BBC show or something, that said it talked about, like, if a guy was sent to prison, how his life, even if it was just like a shorter term. It just like would destroy his life if he was like a nobleman or something, or
Oh, yeah.
upper class. That it
Yeah.
was just like earth shattering. It seemed like America, you can kind of get out, you can recover or whatever to some degree, but
Right.
yeah.
Yeah. I think forgiveness was harder to achieve there in terms of once your moral reputation, not just in terms of crime, but
Right.
maybe even in terms of sexual morality. You know,
Yeah.
a stain was that was it. You didn't get another chance. So
Wow.
yeah.
And how many years were you there in Oxford?
Altogether, it was 5. I did come back in the midst of it to do a little bit of sessional or adjunct teaching at Carleton University, but altogether it was about 5 years. Mm-hmm.
And some of the Victorian literature that you loved or that inspired you, what would those novels be?
Okay, well, where do I start? I told you I love poetry, so some of my favorite poets are Matthew Arnold, Tennyson. I know he's out of favor these days because, you know, he writes long poems and they rhyme in a very obvious way, but I think he was a brilliant poet. I think he deserves a comeback. I also love the poetry of Gerard Manley Hopkins, and he is still appreciated today, especially in Catholic circles. I think people appreciate the genius he had for bringing together Catholic theology and just beautiful language that is so rich and sensuous in the best possible way. So I mean, it's hard to compete with Gerard Manley Hopkins.
And James Joyce, he was later, wasn't he?
A little bit later, yeah, modern, so
More modern.
kind of early 20th century.
And he was Protestant, wasn't he? Or?
He was raised Catholic. He was
Okay.
raised Catholic and then turned against his
Church,
Catholic faith. Yeah, he was very had several axes to grind with the Catholic Church, and so as far as I know, was something of an agnostic. I don't think he was a practicing Christian after he abandoned his faith as a young man. I could be wrong about that, but that's my impression.
Was there like a Catholic writer during that time? Somebody had told me there was a Catholic, I think in the time period of Joyce, that was was more devout Catholic and wrote along those lines.
Okay, let's see. Well, of course, Chesterton is also, you know, early part of the 20th century.
Right.
Belloc, Hilaire Belloc, but they're not so much writing fiction. Well, no, Chesterton wrote novels.
Yeah,
They're not my favorite novels. They're good, but they're not my favorite. Who else was writing good Catholic fiction? I'm sure there are some obvious ones I'm not thinking of.
I guess T.S. Eliot or Moi and
Evelyn Waugh, yes.
Yeah,
Okay,
Evelyn
yes,
Waugh.
yeah. That would be a good one to consider from a similar time period. Brideshead Revisited is a wonderful Catholic novel. That is a work of genius that I really appreciate. Mm-hmm.
But you've taught a lot on Dante, right? The Divine
Dante,
Comedy.
yes. That's my favorite
What's your favorite?
work to teach is the Divine Comedy because it just has everything in it. It's beautiful from the point of view of Catholic theology, but it brings in history, it brings in philosophy, it brings in art, music, even psychology, human psychology. It's all there, and worked together in such a harmonious way that you just sit back and say, "Wow, he was so talented to be able to bring all this together."
And you've taught the course many times, and
A few times.
Yeah.
Hmm.
What are your students? What would they especially be responsive to? What aspect of this work?
Well, of course, everyone, in general, readers, not just at Our Lady Seat of Wisdom College, but in general, are kind of fascinated with the Inferno, because the sins there are so kind of shocking, and we react to the grotesque nature, not just of their sins, but of the commensurate punishments that go with those sins. And so I think there is that kind of surface enjoyment, we could say, of just the bizarre, the unusual, the shocking, and my students will respond to that as well. But I encourage them, and they are open to exploring and appreciating the beauty and the interest that is contained in the Purgatorio and the Paradiso. Paradiso is the hardest of the three to appreciate, but well worth the effort. And so what do they respond to? Well, they're in a privileged position in that they understand and have studied a lot of the theology that is the context for and supports what Dante's doing in the Divine Comedy. So he's taking us through this journey, through hell in the Inferno, through purgatory, and through paradise, ultimately to the final destination, which is the beatific vision at the end. So we go through this long journey to get to kind of the summit of our lives. So at least we all hope it will be our ultimate destination is the beatific vision, the vision of the Trinity, which is just so breathtakingly beautiful that he can't even describe it, but he sketches it out in so far as words can do that. So students respond to the way in which the theology and the philosophy that they've studied, and that is the backdrop for Dante's journey in the Divine Comedy, they come to life, right? They're enfleshed in what Dante witnesses around him as he sees, the sinners being punished, and how the penitents being transformed, being purified of their sins in Purgatorio, and then finally what it looks like to actually embody virtue. What does virtue actually look like? The souls of the virtuous, kind of embodying, so to speak, the qualities that we all strive for.
Yeah, and I've heard it praised for that, like his presentation of the virtues was insightful. I can't recall now what the particulars were, but
well, what's really interesting, I don't know what you're thinking of, but one thing that strikes me is that he can even take what might otherwise be, or what is, a vice, and show that if corrected and steered in the right direction, that very vice can become a virtue, or can be transformed into a virtue. So for example, he has the amorous in the Paradiso. And these are, in the lower levels of paradise, these are people who had flaws, right? They had not fatal flaws, but imperfections in their souls. But once they converted and were willing to let God, transform that, those very flaws became their strengths. So the amorous, for example, are people who they had a propensity towards lust, towards libidinous passions. But once corrected, that passionate nature then becomes this incredible quality of being on fire for God. And so I think that's a pretty deep insight, right? That we don't have to despair just because we have problematic or sinful inclinations. If we let God transform those inclinations, they can actually become assets.
Right. And I know this is to go from the sublime to the ridiculous, but I know in the sports world sometimes, like things that make a guy a great coach or something, it might be drive or something, but it could be his weakness too, right?
Right. Yes, I think Dante saw that. I think he saw that. So on the negative side, they really can bring us down. There are actual souls in hell, right? He doesn't sugarcoat that. He's going to show us. He's going to show us the reality, and as the pilgrim. So he's both the poet, and he portrays himself as the pilgrim, having gone through this, or going through this experience. So he doesn't sugarcoat it. Dante, the pilgrim, going through this experience, has to see, it's real. It's real. These people made choices, as one of the penitents says, as in life, so in death, right? The things that we choose in life, when we get to the afterlife, we're just going to see the logical extension or conclusion of those things. It's not that God imposes some kind of arbitrary punishment. No.
Right.
We
formed a character.
Right.
Our
We buried
Yeah.
we dug our own graves, so to
Yeah,
speak. You know,
yeah.
we prepared our place in hell
Yeah.
by choosing making the choices that we did in on earth. Right. So
Yeah.
he doesn't sugarcoat it, but if we do allow God to transform us, then the beauty of it is that no matter what our sinful inclinations, we give those over to God. We say, no, I choose you, Lord. I choose love.
Mm-hmm.
Transform me, and he can take those weaknesses and they can become strengths.
Yeah. I was recently talking to a priest that he had a near-death experience, and I said, "What was it like?" I mean, he really, in his thinking, he was thinking he was going to die, and he said, because I sometimes I feel like at the end of seminary, my whole time in seminary, you know, I wanted to be a better student. You know, you study a little bit every night, you keep up with all the reading, you do, and you never quite matched. At least I didn't. And then at my last semester, I said, "Okay, this has been a failed experience. Let's go into life." And I said, "I feel like I'm going to do that at the end of life." You know, I tried to be better. I tried to be better. But this priest told me, he said, you know, he just had a sense of trust. I thought it was beautiful. You know, he had a sense of trust in God, that he was repentant of his sins, and he trusted in the mercy of God. And but I remember, it's funny you said that about, you know, the repeated choices we make. That I remember asking my father that one time. Said how he talked about, you know, somehow we were talking about why people go to hell, and he said, you know, if you're making those choices all along, you're going to make the same choice at the end of your life.
Exactly right. Exactly
Yeah.
right. Yeah. No, Dante would definitely agree with that.
Yeah.
But God doesn't want us
Right.
to fail. He doesn't want us to go
Right,
to hell.
right.
And so that's another beautiful thing about the Divine Comedy, is so many times and in so many ways, people are helping Dante to get to the right destination. So right from the beginning, you know, famously, he's there nel mezzo del cammin di nostra vita, right in the middle of this journey, this path we call life. He's lost in a dark wood, and he's overwhelmed by the sight of these, you know, three beasts that stand in his way, and he's stuck. What am I going to do? And along comes Virgil, you know, who has been sent to help Dante along the path. And then, you know, eventually Beatrice takes over and takes him even further. And then finally, St. Bernard of Clairvaux is there to help him in the final stages of the Paradiso. So one after another, and with the blessing of Our Lady, constant helps. And that's another message that Dante has, is, you know, we're not alone in this. We may feel lost, lost in a dark wood like Dante is. Dante, the everyman, the character who stands in the place of any of us, right? He's choosing a hero here. Dante the Pilgrim is, he's not an absolute villain, right? Then we would just condemn him. Then we would say, well, you know, like Shakespeare's Iago and Othello, we'd say, you know, he's just, this is, you know, a villainous character. We write him off. So he's never that bad. We never want to do that. But neither is he some kind of idealized saintly character we look at and say, well, he's good, and I'm glad he makes it to heaven, but that could never be me, because, you know, he's so much better than I am. And so he's this everyman character. He's scared. He's scared, and at the beginning he says, I don't want to do this. I don't want to do this. Sure, you know, St. Paul experienced went on a journey in the afterlife. Aeneas in the Aeneid, you know, he went into the underworld, but I am not Paul, and I am not Aeneas.
Right.
So it's like, you know, I want to check out here. I don't want to do this. And any of us we can picture ourselves in that situation. Thankfully, you know, Beatrice, the thought of Beatrice and his beloved Beatrice spurs him on, and so he agrees to undertake the journey. But the fact that he's constantly afraid, you know, he's constantly wanting to back out. He's constantly having reactions that Virgil has to correct him on. No, you know, don't sympathize with that sinner. You're not supposed to be criticizing God here. But no, it's very real. He's a very real human character, and I love that about Dante the Pilgrim. And it's a very strong encouragement for the reader to just hang in there, allow God to send us helpers, to give us His grace above all, to get us through to that final destination, the beatific vision.
Yeah, I think that's such an important point in life. I feel like God's hammering that in my own life. Since, I can remember when I was ordained a priest, we had the kind of this celebratory dinner, and I remember saying something along the lines, I just feel like a group project here. So many people have helped us. And I think that's so important for the Christian, that we don't have to do it alone.
No.
And why would you want to? It's a richer journey, right? If you have others helping you, if you can kind of...
Well, this is why I think literature can be so important too, because not only does God give us actual real people, but then if you find literary characters who can encourage you, who can help you really take that imaginative leap of what is it like to follow God, to truly love. If we can have characters in literature who embody that for us, then we have friends for life. Right? We can pick up that book anytime and be encouraged and be strengthened. Food for the journey, right?
Right. And on hell, is Judas at the bottom?
Yes, okay. Judas is at the very bottom, the ninth circle of hell. Right. Along with Brutus and Cassius. Those are the three, and others, but those are the three that are, sort of symbolically sticking out of the mouths of Satan in the ninth circle of hell.
And so he's writing in the 1300s, right?
Yes, yeah. He died in 1321.
And to have such loyalty, like for ancient Rome and Brutus, I don't get that.
Yeah. Well, see, they symbolize treachery. They symbolize treachery to the more we should have loyalty to someone, the worse that treachery is. So he goes through different kinds of treachery as he's going through. There are different kind of layers of that circle of hell. But those traitors in the very lowest level of hell are traitors to their Lord, and if you think about it, that is the ultimate treachery. I mean, we can be traitors to our family, but at the end of the day, you could say, "Well, I didn't choose my family. I didn't choose my family." Literally, traitors to kin is a higher level because it's not that it's excusable to be traitor to your family, but it's maybe a little more excusable if you're a traitor to someone you didn't choose. But the Lord is the one to whom we owe the ultimate allegiance. We make that choice to follow our Lord. Judas made the choice to follow our Lord, and then he betrayed him.
Right. Now, like Brutus' case would be against the government, right? Or Caesar.
Well, against against. But again, so we think of Shakespeare's "Et tu, Brute." He was a friend and follower of this political leader. Right, and so when you've done that, you've given your allegiance to someone, you've chosen that, and then you betray them. Yeah. I mean, that's kind of the ultimate betrayal. Yeah.
And the culture of the time, was it like a lot of factions, a lot of war, skirmishes?
Oh yeah. Well, in Italy?
Yeah.
Italy in the early 1300s. Yes. I mean, I think in Italy today, even as I understand it, there are many different political groups, all often conflicting with one another. But it was certainly the case in Dante's time, and he was involved in politics. He was a leader of Florence for a time, and that's how he got into some trouble and got caught on the wrong end of politics and was exiled, as you know, right, for the rest of his life. After the early, beginning of the century, he was turfed out, and partly through the machinations of Pope Boniface VIII, whom Dante then announces will be entering hell. So he basically puts them in hell.
Now, does that take away from? I mean, because I've seen these theologians will use his work, to explicate on virtues and stuff, but it sounds kind of personal, vindictive.
Well, I know. I would defend it this way: that in order to make his work real, he had to create or put in the circles of hell characters who would be credible as actual people. He did not want to create just an allegory. I'm thinking of what J.R. Tolkien says about allegory. He didn't want to write allegory either, because allegory encourages you, if you're writing pure allegory, you're encouraging the reader to jump over the literal level to the allegorical level.
Right.
But Tolkien, and I think Dante too, would say, but the literal level is important. The level of the story should stand on its own. Yes, Dante was also writing with an allegorical intent. He makes that clear in his letter to Can Grande della Scala, his patron. But the literal level was really important for him. He did not want to bypass that. His characters are real, so much so that they are actual real people. And yeah, one could accuse him of playing out petty, personal animosities in his writing, but I don't think that's what he was doing. After all, he put friends in there too. He put people he admired. His teacher Brunetto Latini is there in the seventh circle of hell, and I don't think they gave Dante any pleasure to put him there, but he had to recognize, okay, this guy, that's where he deserved to be. Right. So I genuinely think this is Dante saying, you live like this, you live this way, this is what your fate will be. This is the ultimate outcome of your choices and behavior. Some of them happened to be people he didn't like, or who were mean to him, were vicious towards him. But I think he was equally capable, as I say, of putting people he didn't, he did actually like into hell, and vice versa, right? People that he didn't necessarily admire personally, but he could recognize, okay, these people had virtues, and this is where they belong. And it certainly helped his readers, I would imagine, right, to really concretely understand, okay, this is the kind of person he's talking about.
Oh, I see. And then the role of Beatrice, she's one of these guides.
Beatrice, yeah, there's so much to say about Beatrice. That is one of the things I love about the Divine Comedy, and which you were asking me earlier, what do students respond well to? They really do respond well to the whole story of Dante's relationship to Beatrice. And one of the ways I encourage them to see it in its proper light, that whole relationship, is when I teach the Dante course, we start by reading a short work by Dante called La Vita Nuova. The New Life was the literal translation. And in that work, this is an early work, so it preceded the Divine Comedy. In it, Dante is expressing his love for Beatrice in a very earthly way. It goes somewhat, he idealizes her. She's this, beautiful woman. He's pining, he's love-struck from, the age of 8 or 9. She was 8, he was 9, I think. But, it's kind of over the top, this kind of romantic love. But that's the point, is that is where he was at earlier in his life. He idealized this woman. He didn't really know her that well, but he ascribed to her all these wonderful qualities, and then kind of had this imaginary almost relationship with her, where she just he put her on a pedestal and then he worshipped her. A lot of it is just kind of sublimated lust, frankly. There are some very carnal passages in the Vita Nuova, but what makes all of that interesting is then how he transforms that love into a proper chaste love in the Divine Comedy, such that he's inspired, his love for her inspires him to take the journey, which he needs to take. This is necessary for his salvation to undergo this journey. And then, when he gets to the top of the Purgatorio, he's chastised by Beatrice for his failure to be really true to her. At a stage in his life, he kind of forgot about Beatrice and was enthralled with philosophy, with Cicero, and so she chastises him for that. And so he's willing to be rebuked and corrected by this woman who then is teaching him in the school of true love, of charity ultimately, and love for God. So,
Well, is
yeah.
she symbolic? I mean, she was a real person.
She was a real person,
Yeah.
Beatrice Portinari.
Mhm.
Yeah.
And was she an allegory for something? Or?
Again, I would be careful about using the
Yeah.
word allegory because I think she's important to him as a person, as a real life historical,
Right.
you know,
right.
13th century figure. So it was in the late 1200s that he related to her. I mean, I think yes, she has an allegorical significance.
Right.
What does she can represent different things. We could certainly say that she represents grace, you know, God's gift of himself to the soul, and faith, right? She also represents faith. And so on various levels, yes, she does represent God's help to Dante in his life. And you might also say she represents the Virgin Mary as a virtuous woman, you know, that kind of ideal feminine figure.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Is the Virgin Mary in the story of
She,
Dante?
yes, we see her in the upper levels of paradise, yes.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
And would this be at the beginning of the Renaissance, or?
Well, that's debated, right? That's debated. I would tend to still call Dante a medieval figure, and
Okay.
I think Petrarch, who's kind of the next generation, for me would be the beginning of the Renaissance. So I would say Dante is still medieval, and then Boccaccio, Petrarch represent the beginnings of the Renaissance in Italy. But there are those who call Dante a Renaissance figure. I guess it depends how you interpret Dante. Do you see him as a revolutionary figure, or do you see him as kind of all of a piece, a continuation of the medieval period that led up to Dante? I would say I would side with those who see him as kind of the culmination of the medieval era. I mean, everything he brings together in the Divine Comedy is thoroughly medieval. I mean, it's Thomistic. St. Thomas is shot through. Everything in the Divine Comedy is shot through with St. Thomas. He has new ways of presenting. I mean, it's very creative. It's very imaginative. But I think the theology is fundamentally still medieval.
Yeah, I'm fascinated too with preaching and rhetoric, and I need to read Aristotle and Rhetoric. It's not that long, but I was told that, like, I think he was talking about, you know, like speaking, and that you know, the use of analogy, and there was no like formula or way of just to come. It's like I think he ascribed to it like as a genius. Either someone's got that ability to make the analogy or not.
Right.
And I absolutely love it. That's like I thirst for, like in a movie or something, when somebody makes an analogy like to capture the essence of what's going on, or the story, or the real turning point, or the moral. It just seemed like it clicks in a deeper way.
Yeah.
Like
Yeah.
we were talking about Oppenheimer earlier, and it's like, I didn't like the movie, and I don't recommend it, but I mean, I guess you would call that an analogy, but he's, you know, because there's discussion about, are you going to ignite the hydrogen in the atmosphere when you blow up the first atomic bomb? You know, there's some chance. And so people were worried about that, and it's kind of had some humor to it, even in the movie. And later on, when he's trying to stop the proliferation of nuclear weapons and stuff, and the movie ends, it's towards the end where he says, basically, we do have this possibility of destroying the world because of all these weapons out there. And I just, I don't know why, that just struck me so much that, you know, just to have that way, I don't know, it's like beyond clever to me. There's something.
Right. There's a richness there, right?
Yeah.
I mean,
yeah.
so Dante was in that tradition, which he is developing and inheriting from St. Augustine.
Right.
And so in his letter to Can Grande della Scala, Dante outlines the different levels of allegory. So he talks about, first of all, of course, the literal, the moral level, then what he calls the allegorical, which is really, we could say, the Christological, And then the eschatological,
Right.
right? The end times. So what does this passage say? If we read it on the level of the end times, what does it mean? And Dante is very sensitive to all four of these levels. And so we can read his work as actually playing out on all those levels simultaneously. That is one of the beautiful things about the Divine Comedy. So, in that letter he talks about the flight of the Israelites from Egypt, and how you can see that on these different levels. So, just to continue that point a little bit, the literal level is true, right? It really happened. The Israelites really did escape from the Egyptians. And again, Dante would say that's important. Let's not jump over the literal. Let's remember that it's real. But then on the moral level, we can see that as an allegory for the soul being delivered out of sin, right? So that we can see that, and that's I'm sure that's patristic, even just seeing that escape of the Israelites from Egypt as the soul being escaping from sin. The Christological level is almost the same, except it always involves Christ. So it's Christ delivering us from slavery to sin. And then the
a greater bondage than I always like to say that.
yeah.
Preaching. He delivers us from a greater bondage than making bricks in the Egyptian hot sun. He's delivering us from sin and death. And his blood is spilt on the wood. Before it's a Paschal lamb, now it's his blood. And John the Baptist, there's the Lamb of God.
That's so beautiful,
Yeah.
right? And then so finally the eschatological would be seeing that playing out as a kind of final judgment. Let's say when the last judgment happens, right? Then we are delivered over from slavery into the total freedom of heaven. Right? So Dante writes this all in his letter to Can Grande della Scala, and we can see really the whole journey of the Divine Comedy as an allegory on all these different levels, which does, you're right, it makes it so rich.
Yeah.
And then to take any passage and to analyze it in this way gives us even richer meanings than just the literal level.
Yeah, it's a deeper meaning. Like with Tolkien, in The Lord of the Rings, that the American version of hero, right, is like I think of like the West, right, the cowboys, and I'm trying to think of that movie with Gary Cooper. He defends the town. He basically has to almost do it by himself. High Noon, right? His wife actually saves the day, so I guess it's not even true there. But it's usually like the radical, rugged, independent guy fights his,
rugged individualist.
Yeah, and then here in Lord of the Rings, Frodo fails, right, and Gandalf protects Gollum. He still may have a role to play, and there's always some kind of reference to. I forgot the terminology, but like God is still directing this. He doesn't say God, but there's a power force guiding this whole mission, And Frodo fails to throw the ring. The only reason the ring's in the Mount Doom, Mordor, or whatever, is that the guy got his finger bit off by this wicked Gollum, right? And I absolutely love that because it's like, it's so unexpected from like an American point of view. But then it's the work of God's grace. You're not saved by your own efforts. You're not saved just trying harder, right? That God is guiding us. He is there with us.
Right.
And by grace, we're saved. And so...
Yeah, I mean, to come back to a novel that you referred to earlier, a writer that you referred to, Eva Lenoir, and Brideshead Revisited, there's a similarity there in that these characters mess up their lives so badly.
Yeah, right.
And they really never do kind of rise above
Yeah.
the mess of it. But at the end of the novel, when I won't give away too much here in terms of what actually happens to the characters,
Go ahead.
but when Charles Ryder returns to Brideshead Revisited, the mansion, he goes to the chapel, and the red light of the chapel is still flickering. It's still lit, right? And so we get the sense that despite all the messiness of our lives as human beings, God is still present, and He's there to save us. And it's His saving action that redeems us, not our own, not our own pulling ourselves up by our bootstraps.
Right.
So Yeah, I think that's right. The hero that we find in really Christian Catholic literature is probably not going to be, this impeccable knight in shining armor that never gets wounded, right?
Right. Yeah.
It's going to be someone flawed. It's going to be someone who probably falls flat on his face a number of times,
Yeah.
as Dante does.
I know Mother Angelica on air, she loved to talk about the apostles and like their failings and stuff. And the scripture scholars point out that he gives testimony that how this is authentic writing, because if anybody was starting something, you wouldn't write about all these flawed characters.
Right.
I mean, they're like,
good point.
Yeah, it's like you would write a book that showed the strength of these 12 men, to go out and
Right.
and spread this strong, wonderful church, But it's like it's got surround. I mean, they all abandoned him except for John. Who would write that?
Right.
I mean, you write about the history of Apple or Microsoft or whatever. It's just this ascending triumph,
Yeah,
But
that's right. That's right.
yeah, and it's
Makes it all the more believable, doesn't it?
yeah, and Pope Benedict, he wrote this wonderful book. I think it's called The Communion. He's got this great quote that, he said, like, Peter himself embodies that the church is not made up of these perfect people. It's like sinners on the way. That yes, the church is holy and has saints and means of salvation, but all the while she's clutching sinners to her bosom, and that Peter is the image of denying our Lord, failed, but having risen again through repentance, by grace. That is such a deep message. It's just so much shallower than having like this perfect hero, just
So much deeper.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I was sharing, I was making this big retreat up at Madonna House, and I brought with me Dante, fully intending best intentions to. I thought I was just going to read. I was so enthralled by Madonna House, I just wound up visiting with people. So most of I was there like a very active time. They were slaying chickens and picking apples. And
there's a great way of getting through the Divine Comedy I can recommend maybe for some of your listeners, which is 100 Days of Dante. And if you go, I think you just Google 100 Days of Dante. And it'll bring you to a site where you can sign up to receive emails. I'm not connected to this. This is not a promotional thing on my part. It's just something I think worth sharing with your listeners. And that's so you sign up for this thing, and it'll send you reminders and links to videos of academics or scholars speaking about the individual cantos. And so you read a canto, you can decide how frequently, it could be every day, it could be every few days, but you read a canto and then you watch a video of a scholar speaking in a very accessible way, I would add, about each of the cantos.
Wow.
So it's a great way, just kind of, again, just like with writing, you break it down into pieces. If you sit there and say, I want to read the Divine Comedy, well, good luck. But if you say, I'm going to read a canto every few days and I'm going to watch a video that will help explain it and allow me to go deeper into what's happening in this canto, then, you might get somewhere. So that would be a bit of advice I would share with your readers or listeners.
So if you just Googled that, 100 Days of Dante?
Yeah, it should get you there, yeah.
And you did recommend one translation, the Hollander, you said?
I'm going to tell you a little bit about, I'm going to say two different ones. I mean, there are many beautiful translations out there, many, many ones. And I do appreciate Anthony Esselin's. It's a great translation. But there are two in particular I would recommend for different reasons. Actually, there's a third. It's hard to live
5 years at Oxford. You have
Well, I think the Hollander one is the one that I use for my Dante course. It's Robert and Jean Hollander. And the reason I choose them is I find that it's the best combination of fidelity in translation, sticking to the meaning accurately to the meaning of the Italian, but also some excellent explanatory notes. So the commentary, the notes to the Divine Comedy are also excellent and very robust, very full. So I think that if you're only going to take one, there's also the Italian and English side by side, so you can also refer to the Italian if you want. but as a total package, I think it has the most for one translation. Having said that, I would also say, just for readability of translation, if you want maybe one of the easier ones, I find Mandelbaum's translation is one of the most accessible. He doesn't try to keep the rhyme. He has blank verse, so it's got the structure, but the rhythm, the meter of iambic pentameter, but he doesn't try to make it rhyme in the way that the Italian does with the terza rima. So that means he has more freedom to just kind of say things in a more ordinary way, if I could put it that way, as a more kind of accessible way. So it might be a good one for some of your readers to start with. But then at the other end of that spectrum, there's Dorothy Sayers. And what's lovely about her translation is precisely the opposite. She does keep the terza rima, so the A, B, A, B, C, B, C, D, C rhyme scheme. It's very musical and beautiful. It's a bit dated, but very musical, and it gives you a good sense, short of actually reading the Italian, it gives you a sense of what the Italian poem sounds like or feels like musically. And so I do really enjoy, and her notes are also excellent. I do think that her translation can be good for classroom use as well, both because of the musicality of the language and because of the extensive notes, which are, she was a high Anglican, so she really understood, even though she wasn't Roman Catholic herself, but so close that her notes are really excellent in terms of giving the theological context and explication of what Dante's doing. I really do value hers as well. Anthony Eslin's is great, not as extensive with the notes, so it's more kind of for a layman's enjoyment of the poem and appreciation of the poem. It's also an excellent translation. So there are many, many options, but Hollander is the one I tend to favor in the classroom. Mandelbaum I tend to sort of recommend as someone's first attempt at reading it, kind of for pleasure or just for knowledge.
And maybe go ahead and read it for our listeners. This caught me on my retreat. It was just first night of the Inferno. Midway on our life's journey, I found myself in dark woods, the right road lost. To tell about those woods is hard, so tangled and rough. And I thought, wow. I think everybody, right, at some point, if you live long enough, you hit some kind of dark woods.
Yep.
And it seems like, and somebody was saying that too, like with faith, we don't have all the answers. We don't know many times, like, what is the right road? We have this faith that we have to trust God and, make some choice, I guess, make a decision. But that's, like, what do I do here? I'm running a college. Okay, what do I do?
What do I do? I've been getting an answer to that recently.
Oh, really?
Unless, did you want to finish that point?
Go
ahead.
Well, just the last point. Yeah, to tell about those woods is hard, so tangled and rough. I love that part, too, because it's like, I've got some good friends. I've got some friends that, some older gentlemen in my life that can help kind of mentor me at times. But there's some things like you can't explain. Or like, I don't know, maybe the modern psychologists would say, like, whatever family of origin stuff's getting triggered in you, we're a mystery.
Right.
And it's like, I don't know why this is driving me crazy, but it is, right? And so anyway, but that.
Well, no, that's great.
Yeah.
I was just going to add that in some ways, for me, the end point of Dante's Divine Comedy comes back to answer the beginning point. And very, very much in a personal way right now, I'm hearing this word contemplation. Because what he arrives at after all that arduous journeying is a point of contemplation. He beholds the beatific vision, and that's kind of the meaning in retrospect of the whole journey. That's what it was. How Aristotle says, that everything that we do, we have to do with the end in mind. Well, let's do life with that end in mind. If our end is contemplation, then let's live life so that it leads us there. Well, how do we do that? Well, we do that by injecting contemplation throughout our days. And so what do I do as president? I'm learning. It's a journey, right? But I'm learning to work my days around that contemplation. And we had a retreat this summer with our chaplain, Father Brian Christie from Madonna House, and he was talking about teaching and working from rest. And rest here really meant contemplation, the recollected life. You know, I don't go out in a frenzy trying to get all these things done and then sneak a little prayer in.
Right.
No. I pray and contemplate, and out of that contemplation flows the work that I have to do.
Oh.
It's really life-changing.
Yeah.
It's probably the project of the rest of my life to really try to live that out. But it is certainly an inspiring thought.
Yeah, I was thinking, just like the discipline of the spiritual life. I think I keep coming back to John Paul II. I just think about his amazing life and to have that burden of the papacy for I think 26 years. And, but in younger life, he was like late for things. They used to call it Votiva time.
Oh,
He was late for
I
a
didn't know
wedding. Yeah, I was reading a story. He was like I think it was over an hour late for a wedding, right?
Oh my goodness.
In America, that would be, I mean,
Forget it.
they would have your head, right?
Yeah.
And, but, he would, as a pope, he had a rigorous schedule. He'd get that prayer in the morning, especially, I understand, that, he had his private mass. I mean, he had people who were there with him, but praying before mass, maybe pray the rosary, like in the afternoon, he'd take a walk in the gardens and stuff. But I would think it's like, okay, I've got this impossible meeting tomorrow. I got to spend some extra time on preparation, so I'll do the prayer later.
Oh,
I mean, it's like,
yeah, it's so easy to fall into that.
Yeah. So,
It is,
So does it? You hear it that way, like I have to have the discipline to do this kind of prayer early or whatever, and
Right. It's making it the priority so that other things have to fall into place around that. Not, I have to squeeze the prayer in where I can. And I mean, it's a tough thing to achieve. And I think, like Dante, we just have to keep getting up after we fall flat on our faces.
Right.
Keep striving for that ideal.
Yeah.
But
and it's fun to see, like we were talking before, life hacks are so popular, like these short little articles on productivity and everything.
Yeah, right.
And, but so to get that kind of stuff, first things first, get that prayer in early. But one of the things one of these people were saying, the guy was talking about, fitness. The one thing that if you have this quality, you will not fail, and it's like to not give up trying, And I thought, I think about like Teresa of Avila saying that's one of the most vital of virtues, right? Is that perseverance, and not to, if you keep getting up again and trying to get a little bit better today, and
Yep.
I had the most moving interview. I don't know if you saw the movie about Father Stu. He was an American priest.
I've heard about it. I haven't seen the movie, no.
Yeah, he was out in Montana. I think he died like in 2015 or so, and he developed something like Lou Gehrig's disease in seminary, I think, and his bishop prayed about it and ordained him, and he lived something like 7 years, I think. And I was talking to his sister who wasn't Catholic, and I said, when you think about your brother, what is the most usual common thing you'll think about reflecting on his life, And she said, when I get up in the morning, I think I can stand up on my own. I can brush my teeth. I can just begin my day. She says, and then I think, too, that what good can I do a little bit more than yesterday? And it was funny because we did this hour. I flew out to Montana for the opening of this movie. I interviewed like some priest friends. I interviewed a guy with a STL priest that was great at putting theology and contextualizing his life, and heard all these great details of his life and lay friends and all this stuff. And then I interviewed her, and I think we used like only 3 or 4 minutes from her interview, but we had it at the very end. And she said, he had that effect on everybody. He had to have everybody want to try a little bit harder to be better today. Because he was struggling so much. He's growing paralysis. He's like, still trying to offer mass in very limited way, or all
Yeah.
this, and meeting with people and all this. And I said, she said more in 2 minutes than the rest of the show. It was like,
Right.
but anyway, so we just talk about that quality of perseverance.
Well, speaking of life hacks, I said this to you earlier, but I'll just say it here on the podcast, is people are always talking about goals,
Mhm.
life
right,
goals. That's a big
right.
thing
Yeah,
these days,
yeah,
life goals.
uh-huh.
What are your life goals? Well, I like to think, Dante teaches us to talk about afterlife goals.
Mm.
What's your goal? What's your goal for after? Stephen Covey talks about in his 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. Imagine what you want people to say about you at your funeral.
Right.
And that's kind of shape your whole life to work towards that. What they're going to say about you at your funeral. And I think he just didn't go quite far enough. You got to go after the funeral. After the funeral, what happens after that?
Right. Not to lose sight of that. And what, on the beatific vision, is there something from there that touched you, that maybe made you think of heaven in a different way than?
Wow. It's a very complex image.
Mhm.
I mean, it's even hard to describe how he's describing it. I
Yeah.
mean, these 3 circles that are kind of interlocking and,
Mhm.
and spinning, and but it's an image of infinity.
Mm.
But it's also very incarnational. He sees Christ in there. He sees
Yeah.
Christ in that threefold, in the Trinity. I think above all, it just impacts me with the mysterious nature, like how far beyond our human understanding,
Yeah.
how far beyond our human understanding the Trinity is,
Right.
and the beatific vision would be. I mean, it would be so infinitely rich that we
Mhm.
could never exhaust
Mhm.
the meaning and the beauty of it.
Mm.
So that's wow, right?
Yeah,
I mean,
yeah.
if you're busy in your day and you take a moment to read that and reflect
Yeah.
on it, yeah, it really transforms your inner state
Right.
to a more recollected state, I think.
Yeah, and the world, I mean, Bishop Barron talks about evangelization, how vital beauty is to that, like for young people especially.
Yes.
There's this immediacy to it. It can just strike the heart. We crave that, and a kind of a cult of ugliness in our world today in many ways.
Yeah.
So, and then we see, like, I think Augustine would talk about, like, the vestiges, or traces, or Bonaventure, these footprints of God leading us to Him, the beauty itself. And because when I first entered the community, I thought, okay, we're Franciscan. I gotta recognize all this deep stuff in nature and all this. And I always loved the outdoors. I grew up in a rural area and stuff, in woods and things. But I just came to appreciate just the small, simple things. Like a pretty day, a sunny day, a breezy day, the leaves doing whatever.
Yeah.
Just maybe some pleasantness of a nice breeze or rain.
True. Yeah.
Yeah, like even very simple things. And how nurturing it is, how calming and peaceful. It's like we crave that. And
Music too, right? I mean,
Yeah,
music has
yeah.
that, and especially Gregorian chant has that simplicity. That's why it's the music for the ages. I mean, it's you can never really tire of it done simply but well.
Right. And that's been a draw for you, like with poetry? Like, why?
Yeah.
Is the beauty of poetry, the expression there and things?
Right. I mean, what is it about poetry, right, that's distinctive, that differentiates it, let's say, from prose, from novels, what have you? And it is that attentiveness to language. I think with prose, you might be able to say something a little bit differently and you'd still have the same message.
Right.
But with poetry, I mean, I'm thinking of Marshall McLuhan, the medium is the message, but the way that you're saying it is so much a part of the message that they're inextricable. You can't separate them. So you've got, let's say, a poem by W.B. Yeats, The Lake Isle of Innisfree, and you've got the last stanza there. I will arise and go now, for always night and day I hear lake water lapping with low sound by the shore. Like, just think about that line. I hear lake water lapping with low sound by the shore. He's got 3 L sounds at the beginning. He's got big alliteration going on there. But that lusciousness of the language mirrors or matches the lusciousness of the
That
natural
sound,
setting
yeah.
that he's describing, the
Right.
lake water lapping with
mhm.
low sound by the shore. So there, yes, you're right. I mean, there is something about poetry that speaks to me on a very profound level, that where meaning, but also the way that we express meaning are so closely interwoven that they're inseparable.
Mm.
And the beauty is both in the meaning and in the way that it's expressed.
Right.
There's just something, when it happens, when it clicks, it's so uplifting.
Right.
It can take us into that contemplative space, frankly.
Right.
Again, I'm on a contemplation kick, but it takes us into that place of recollectedness, of reflection. I find poetry can definitely do that for me, and I think for many people, if they can take the time to slow down. And you can't speed read poetry. Just by definition, you can't, because you're not allowing the language to settle into your psyche.
Right.
So you have to read it slowly. People talk about slow food these days, where you take your the time to cook something well. Well, poetry is like slow food for the mind. You have to take the time to digest it, to read it and digest it slowly,
Right.
or you're not really reading it.
Yeah. I'm taken by too, like especially like in the scriptures and stuff. And when people preach, sometimes they rephrase things, and it strikes you in a new way. It's like this same truth, but it's now surprising. I haven't heard it put that way. I imagine poetry is like that, to describe.
Definitely, yes.
Yeah.
Well, Hopkins is the king of of doing that. So,
Yeah.
a line like, there lives the dearest freshness deep down things. Right. Well, you could say that in ordinary prose. Oh, things are fresh. Sounds like you're in the grocery store,
right.
looking at the lettuce.
Right.
But the way he says it,
yeah.
there lives the dearest freshness, deep down things. Oh, the alliteration, the even rhythm of the poetry. It speaks to us. It hits us at a different level than just the prosaic, the ordinary speech.
It's like conveying information.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah, because I've heard writers describe beauty. There's a surprising element to beauty. It's like something's there that's unexpected, that maybe shouldn't be there. Like you walk around a corner in the woods, maybe you see the sunset or something, and you're surprised by it's not the usual thing.
Yeah, there's a poem I like, and this is not one that I see quoted a lot recently, but E. Cummings was a 20th century poet. He was something of I think he was a Unitarian. I'm pretty sure he was a Unitarian, so he believed in at most one God.
Yeah.
But he had a way of turning things around in surprising ways in poetry. Like, for example, just one line will give you an experience of what I'm talking about. I thank you, God, for most this amazing day.
Right.
Obviously, most of us would say, I thank you, God, for this most amazing day.
Right.
But when he just changes those two words around, amazing and most, I thank you, God, for most this amazing day. You suddenly have to stop and read it again and think about what he's saying.
Yeah.
Do you know what I'm saying?
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Wait, I don't know poetry, but I remember another one he wrote. I think it was about a woman. He said, like, not even the rain has such small hands. I just love that. There's something about the delicacy of this woman that, I think he wrote that, but it was, but I like that one poem you happened to mention, it is, the amazement of it.
Yeah, I don't hear too much, people don't talk so much about E. Cummings lately, I don't know why. And, I'm sure his theology was off, but that's okay. I mean, as long as we, recognize it for what it is. I think he had that gift of surprising us with language, and that's good. If we can be surprised out of our complacency, out of our kind of chronos time into cosmos time, then this is a good thing.
Yeah. Yeah, there was another passage in my short reading of the Esferto, but he says, he says, "If I have understood your words aright," replied the shade of that great-hearted man, "your spirit has been bruised by cowardice, which many a time so weighs a man's heart down. It turns him from a glorious enterprise, as shadows fool the horse that shies away." You know, I love that. You know, Mother Angelica used to talk about how we get talked out of doing great things. We talk ourselves out of doing great things, you know, for the Lord and stuff. But as shadows fool the horse, you know, we're turned from a glorious enterprise. And it, you know, it might not be this great big fat showy thing, but maybe I'm going to reach out in charity. Maybe I'm going to forgive. Maybe I'm not going to be petty today. You know, maybe it's like, and it's glorious in God's eyes.
Yeah.
You know, it's a resplendent life if we make that Exodus event out of our selfishness and leave our land for a new land. You know, and
Absolutely.
that's a big thing to do.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much for talking with us.
My pleasure. Yep. Thank you very much for having me.